Wow, that David Zaslav is a smooth operator, a cool customer. I'm impressed and a little bit scared. We haven't seen a personality like this in Hollywood, I think, any time in the recent past. Certainly not anything that, maybe back in the early days when they had the studio system. But this is a tough customer. This was a very intentionally vague presentation, and that's very slick and very aggressive. I mean, it sounds a lot like the kind of guy who would go behind everybody's back and secretly buy Warner Brothers from AT&T in a deal that nobody knew about until the last possible minute, fire all the top people once he got it, and then cancel an almost completed movie like Batgirl. I mean, he's telling you who he is. And it's getting interesting already. Wow, that's very, very exciting. Pay attention. All right, so quarterly reports. They are all about getting Wall Street to like your company. You want the stock to go up when the bell rings tomorrow morning. That's why they give the report after the day closes, so there's some time for it to digest before people begin trading again. So you don't talk about firing people in a quarterly report, you don't cancel shows in a quarterly report, and you don't push back movies in a quarterly report. Everything that I've reported first in the last few days was confirmed, like half an hour to an hour later by the trades. And a lot was confirmed during this very presentation. The bottom line is that right now Warner Brothers Discovery is clearly still restructuring. They have a long ways to go, very long ways to go, and they're playing it close to the vest. They made it clear today that they will be ready for a real fancy presentation with lots of information, at least they promise, at the end of the year. That's actually a pretty decent time away, so they got a lot of time to get this right. They said at the end of the year for our Investor Day, we're going to put on a show. Remember Disney Investor Day? I would say that's the gold standard for presentations, but I have some thoughts on that. We'll talk about that in a moment. But anyway, watch the headlines for the next few months to see what gets cut and what doesn't. From jobs, getting rid of redundancies. If you're combining two streaming services into one, you can't keep everybody. You only need enough people to run one streaming service. And then also content. And David Zaslav, one of the main themes of today's presentation was quality over quantity. Even if you're spending more money, you're not necessarily spending it on the same amount of shows. Maybe you want to pour all that money into less shows so they're better. That's interesting because we're going to talk about his movie strategy. And again, I don't care how nice David Zaslav is on an earnings call. That's what he's supposed to do. What he did to Batgirl was ruthless. Wake up. That, we can all be smiles and hugs and, just make sure that candy's wrapped before you eat it, man. All right, so anyway, also, I see less Disney here than I expected, and more Paramount, used to be Viacom, and NBC Comcast Universal. Warner Brothers Discovery really surprised me, and that it looked more like those companies than it did Disney. And I guess that makes sense because David Zaslav started out at NBC and was there for decades when it was in its prime, at the heyday of network television. He even referenced that today, saying that he was at NBC, must-see TV was really Warner Brothers TV. That was a nice little clout drop there. Anyway, today's presentation, in addition to a heck of a lot of financials for Wall Street and investors, so dry. This presentation was very dry. So many charts that you were like, I don't even know what I'm looking at. But two things were very clear, and that was the focus of, I think the most interesting things revealed today, and that's talking about DC Films, which only came out of someone from one of the investment banks asking them a question in the Q&A about DC Films. They weren't going to say anything. But I'm impressed. Zaslav was ready to go, and he didn't give away too much. He was ready to go with another very vague answer. But he gave some information. And then also, of course, HBO Max and Discovery Plus merging into one all-new streaming service, as I reported. I think, just for clarification, my first tweet that got the most traction was that, we'd all thought that Discovery Plus would become a little tab on HBO Max because HBO Max is a great streaming service. So I clarified that that was not the case. And then the next day, you got to keep up with me as I'm covering a developing story. I told you specifically that they would actually be merging into an all-new service that would have neither HBO or Discovery in the name. In fact, I'm hearing it's down to something with Warner or WB in the name. I can't tell you what the second half would be, as it would endanger my source. I think Fox News got a hold of the information as well and has either reported it or already reported it. But I tweeted it yesterday. So anyway, so that's how the story developed, and that's what they're doing. So we'll talk about that. But we want to start with DC Films because it's part of David Zaslav's new, more conservative, old-school business strategy, which affects the entire company, including streaming. So again, he said he's going to focus on quality over quantity, and that he wants to prioritize theatrical releases. Why? Because he believes that, and I think there's some sense to this. I mean, let's see. It's interesting. Disney is becoming more open, even though I think that Chapek and Zaslav have a lot of similarities in the way they think and the way they handle themselves. I think it's interesting that Disney is, trying some more crazy, interesting things and trying to be, an industry, set new standards and redefine the way everything works. Whereas Warner Brothers Discovery is pulling back to more conservative approaches in the hopes that that will maybe tap into maybe not the social media gang, but all those people who aren't on social media, which many of you like to always point out. And Disney's running into trouble with their disruptor. That's what the word is. Disney as a disruptor is being a bit disrupted. So we'll see who's the smarter one here, Chapek or Zaslav. It's an executive race. Okay. So Zaslav feels that big movies will trickle down in value to the rest of the empire. And we've talked about this. It's the engine. You get a big launch with a theatrical release, and then when it goes to all the other marketplaces in the company, people have more, it has better awareness because of the big theatrical ad campaign. So he specifically mentioned the Batman and Elvis. Elvis is, it's no Batman, but it's pretty good. And then also, of course, they made a big splash with Lady Gaga, confirmed for Joker 2 today, even though we already knew it, but became official today. And I think it was no accident that was announced, or Lady Gaga shared that before the presentation today. But anyway, so these movies are big in theaters, and then they trickle down to premium video on demand. I'm curious if Zaslav will release things on premium video on demand and streaming video on demand at no extra cost same day. How can he do that with the pay model that he's unveiling? I don't know if that's possible. So you might, with his movies, with Warner Brothers Discovery movies, go back to a place where first you have to get them like on iTunes or Vudu or wherever you purchase or rent digital movies, and then eventually it'll go to streaming. That's fascinating, and it'll be curious to see. Universal does that. Speaking of NBC, Comcast, Universal, and Peacock. That's their streaming service. Paramount Viacom, which is now just Paramount. But that's fascinating. So anyway, then you have like the pay 1 and pay 2 windows. You have the ancillary market, which is playing on airplanes and hotel rooms. There's a lot of revenue streams here. And I think Zazzy is like, why am I going to just give all these other revenue streams the finger so I can put this on my streaming service? He says, no, I don't want to. It'll get to the streaming service eventually, and I think people will wait. Or they'll pay for it multiple times. It's interesting. It's very interesting. He specifically said that while everyone else, and get this, he even said it, while everyone else is going streaming crazy, he believes that is just one part of the Warner Brothers Discovery empire. Look how small it is. It's on the equal footing as all those other revenue streams. And that's not what the Disney chart looks like. But anyway, he just believes that there are a lot of viewers out there. Some like streaming, some like cable, some like network TV. They've just got those bunny ears on their TV in the living room and they're getting it for free, man. But they watch the commercials. And he's like, I want all their money. Or I want all their eyeballs, and then I'll sell those eyeballs to advertisers. I think he said they got $6 billion in ad revenue or purchases from the upfronts. I know Disney got $9 billion, but still, these are billions, $3 billion apart. But $3 billion apart. Anyway, he did say he'll do less licensing. They're going to sell shows to other networks. He mentioned Ted Lasso's on Apple TV, Abbott Elementary. These are Warner Brothers shows, but they're things that are Warner Brothers proper from the beginning. Those are not going to get licensed to other places. They want them to air on this new fancy streaming service that they're going to debut. All All right, so he said he's not making any more streaming movies, and this is where we start to get to Batgirl. He says, I don't need to make any streaming movies. I got my theatrical movies, which will eventually play on streaming. That, I believe, is why he got rid of Batgirl and that Scooby Christmas movie, Scooby's Holiday Haunt, which, looked pretty good. But as for Batgirl, it did get mediocre test scores, apparently, in the 60s. That's not good. And so I think Zaslav looked at that, and I hear that he watched it himself, and he felt it just wasn't the driver of business that he wants and needs DC movies to be. I still feel that he should have, it's like, just release these two. Just don't greenlight anymore. Like, just release them. Like, why do this? Why upset people? It's because he's ruthless. But it still seems crazy to me, especially if he's not going to do any other crazy moves. Well, let's see what happens over the next few months, as I said. But speaking of crazy moves, he's still releasing The Flash, apparently. He specifically mentioned The Flash. He could have mentioned any DC movie he wanted to, and he was like, The Flash. And so he says that film's going to be released. And I will say that I know The Flash is consistently tested very well in the 80s. And that's about as good as you can do for a big movie, like for a 4-quadrant movie. So it's testing well. I'd be like, can we add a question there as to how you feel about Ezra Miller's recent scandals? I mean, I feel the optics of Ezra's behavior has passed at this point beyond redeemable. At one point, I was there. I thought maybe he could turn it around. But I don't think he's there anymore. I don't think that he can. And I think that axing a movie, getting rid of Batgirl with a lot of talent of color in front of and behind the camera, and yet keeping The Flash, could end up haunting Zaslav. He should ask a lot of people if that movie's really good. He should be like, do you like it? I mean, I like it, but how about you? Because I got to make sure everybody likes this movie. I mean, it's testing well, but I mean, that's not necessarily, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to test with the general public. I mean, welcome to the online fandom. And I think that he would have been better off, personally, taking the hit from Batgirl instead of maybe potentially a much bigger hit later on. I mean, just ask Walter Hamada how he feels about that supposedly private harmless call he made to Ray Fisher and that ended up torpedoing his career. Great news for Michael Keaton and Sasha Calle, though. Looks like they will actually be Batman and Supergirl. That's still going to happen for them. So I guess, it's still, again, so sucky for Leslie Grace. She doesn't get to be Batgirl, but Michael Keaton still gets to be Batman. They said they'll do another movie with Leslie Grace, but they didn't say it was going to be a Batgirl movie. It better be one heck of a good movie. Wow. All right, so anyway, Zaslav also said that Warner Brothers Discovery will protect the DC brand, which implies that Batgirl really sucked. And that was also kind of a mean thing to do. But we all agree that the DC brand needs protecting. So he said how he views that is that it means it will take as long as it takes to get these current DC movies that are in post-production to the place they need to be released, which lines up with what I reported, and the trades confirmed about 30 minutes later yesterday, that Aquaman 2 and Shazam 2 are likely moving. But if Aquaman 2 moves, does that mean The Flash moves as well? Because then why would you redo the Michael Keaton cameo sequence? Make it make sense, please. Actually, please, that's a legit question. Zaslav, during when he was talking about DC, he intentionally name-checked Bob Iger, Alan Horn, and Kevin Feige, saying he wants a 10-year plan for DC like Marvel has over at Disney. But he's only got 2 of the 3, and I think that he's missing the most important of the 3. Because Iger and Horn also oversaw Disney's acquisition and relaunch of Star Wars, and we know that didn't go very well. So we got to find out who's running DC. So we got to put a pin in this until that question is answered, until that person is hired. It's a key hiring. Will he poach from Disney again? He would need an executive, not a creative. So you got to look at maybe someone who's like a number 2 or number 3 over in Feige's camp. Who over there is like the person right behind Feige? Can you maybe get that individual to come over? It's a key hiring decision, and I'm very curious to see who it will be, because you can see what Kathleen Kennedy ended up doing to Star Wars. It's very, very important. I mean, it's one thing to say you have a 10-year plan like Marvel. I mean, even Marvel's stumbling a little bit over there. But it's quite another to actually start to lay it out. But I sincerely hope they do, maybe at the end of the year at the Investor Day, or even sooner. Let's see how long it takes them to hire the head of DC Films. I just settle, though, for a concrete answers to what's happening over the next year or so. All right, now let's talk about HBO Max Discovery Plus. A very confusing situation. And it's always been confusing because people have always had a hard time telling the difference between HBO and HBO Max. There have been HBO shows, and then there have been HBO Max originals. And some of you, a lot of you, watch HBO shows on HBO Max. What? And again, as I said, many people thought that Discovery Plus would just become a tab on HBO Max because it's great the way it is. But they don't feel that way at Warner Brothers Discovery. They feel that they have two halves of a whole, as you can see from this graphic they put together, which I know annoyed a lot of you. But they did the market research, and apparently that's the way it goes. So much for the purple coloring for HBO Max. Dudes are still the only ones who tuned in, it seems. But, and they said Discovery Plus is mostly female. Very interesting. But again, as I reported yesterday, this all-new streaming service, will it be, so they're going to be combined into an all-new streaming service. So will it be less confusing or more confusing? Like when you click on this new streaming service, will you get to choose two doors to enter? Do you want to go to HBO Max or do you want to go to Discovery Plus? Or will they all exist in the same space? I mean, either way, you're going to have to pay for all of that content. That content's all going to come with the same price tag, and it's likely going to be expensive. Like some of you were like, I don't care if that Discovery Plus content is there as long as my HBO Max content is still there. Yeah, but you're going to have to pay for the Discovery Plus content because they're going to feel that the value of the service has increased, even if you don't agree. So that's why they are going to have three choices for you regarding the cost. Oh, and this is a game changer potentially. There is going to be an ad-free version, which will be, very expensive because you're going to be having no ads at all, but you have access to all that content, whether you want it or not. Because, Zaslav argues maybe someone else in your family wants to watch that stuff. All right, so anyway, that's literally what he argued during today's presentation. He said there's a lot of different tastes and personalities and households, and now with this combo, we're going to get them all. So anyway, also there's going to be an ad light version, which means it's cheaper, but you still have to pay for it, and there are only some ads. And then this is where it gets real. Then there's a free option, but with just a lot of ads, which means it's regular television. Now, Peacock currently has a plan like this. So I'm wondering, for those of you who have that plan, and I know some of you do, because, are you paying for Peacock? What do you think of it? Although, here's what's interesting. If you want to watch a recent Universal release, a movie release on Peacock, which has happened a couple of times over the past year or so since it launched, you can't do that on the free version. You can only do it on one of the pay versions. So if you decide to get this new Warner something service, which has all this content on it, unless you pay for it, you might not be getting everything that you otherwise would. But also, if you do the free service, that means all content will have to have ads on it. It's like Hulu. On Hulu, you're watching a show and you can totally tell when the ad's supposed to start playing. But also, what do you do about HBO shows? That means if you watch an HBO show on a service, a new service that's free, if you get the free option, that means there will be ads within your show. That's the only way that could possibly work. So if you're going to watch like Westworld or Euphoria, there's going to be an ad in it. So that's pretty interesting. I guess they could just I don't think they'd start building in ad breaks into HBO content. That would be just really uncool. But, they could just figure out where the ad goes between scenes, like, when you put ads on a YouTube video. But, being on YouTube is a very different experience than being on a streaming service. But this could work. A lot of you might be like, Grace, I don't care. It's free. So, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what model you would go with, the ad-free, the ad-light, or the free. This also, interestingly to me, does not feel like Disney Plus, and it doesn't feel even at all like HBO Max. Hearing about this new service and starting to picture it, I got the feeling that it's like when you log on to Paramount Plus or Peacock. Have any of you done that? It's a very different experience than logging on to Disney Plus or HBO Max the way it is now. Because Disney Plus and the current HBO Max have personality. They have a brand. But when you log into Paramount Plus or Peacock, it feels a lot more like you're logging into the business portfolio of a company, right? It's just so much, and it doesn't always seem like it fits together. And that's kind of how I feel like this new service might feel. Now, so I'll be very curious as to how it's structured. But make no mistake, again, you're still paying for all of it, or not, or you're watching what you already watch, but with ads. So as for content, now there's scripted and unscripted. Now some of you have asked me what the difference is. Scripted is anything where lines are written for the cast. So it's comedy, it's drama, it's shows, it's movies. Unscripted is not just reality TV, but it's also like game shows. It's also documentaries, stuff like that. So unscripted is actually news shows, interviews. That's all that is unscripted. So it's very diverse. Now, again, Zaslav said he's going for quality over quantity, and he's putting Casey Bloys in charge. He made it. The Casey Bloys is the Kevin Feige of TV, and that could be of streaming, and that could be true. Casey Bloys has been at HBO since 2004. He took over in 2016, and now he has a hot new 5-year contract at Warner Brothers Discovery, and he will have total control of HBO, which is now HBO and HBO Max. He will have total control over all their scripted television and what. He'll decide what gets renewed, what doesn't get renewed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he's going to be making probably a lot of those decisions over the next few months, and as well as greenlighting new shows. So HBO, though, HBO is an amazing brand. And I think that, the confusion between they never even reported different subscribers. A lot of nobody knows what HBO Max's subscribership is. You know what HBO and HBO Max's combined subscribership is, but that's including everybody who's subscribed to premium cable. And I know a lot of you get HBO Max for free through AT&T, and they did say they were going to keep up with their AT&T partnership. So, you just like NBC, Universal, Comcast. A lot of people who have Comcast, do you get Peacock, right? Very, very interesting. So anyway, HBO really started today's premium appointment television trend, with The Sopranos. But just start removing HBO Max from your vocabulary. It's HBO, which is actually their famous tagline. It's not TV, it's HBO. So anyway, I hear the new service, which they announced today will be launching in the United States first, summer 2023, so a year from now. Or earlier, they said. They'd like to get it off the ground even earlier, but that's the only launch date they feel comfortable to committing to as of now. But anyway, I'm hearing, as I said, it will have Warner or WB in the title. Some people are saying it might just be Max, which seems silly. But I do know that was something they were considering. Max was one of the choices. But I hear it's down to Warner or WB, something, but I can't tell you because, again, it would endanger my source. But anyway, I will be sure to stay on top of this as Warner Brothers Discovery restructures. It's going to be really interesting. What are your thoughts on all this? What do you think about the presentation versus what's actually been done this week? Right? There's actions and words. And what do you think of what's going on with DC? And what do you think of Warner Brothers Discovery combining HBO Max and Warner Brothers Discovery into one single service? Share all your thoughts down below. Subscribe today. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.